So good morning, happy Tuesday, and welcome back. It's another Breakfast with Bill. Matt's back, and Matt, so good to be back with you. Hope you're well.
I am.
Good.
How are you?
I'm doing good, thanks. We're continuing on today with our series on emotional intelligence, and you might be wondering why I'm coming at you so loud with pink today, but just a little call out to coming up on the end of October and remembering Breast Cancer Awareness Month and all those who are fighting. And if any of your friends, colleagues, or associates on LinkedIn or social media are posting about the Real Men Wear Pink campaign, I encourage you to support them. It's a pretty incredible cause, and obviously we have to look out for all those who are fighting. So as we continue on with our emotional intelligence series, we're coming up this week on motivation. We're going to talk about two types of motivation: the motivation that drives us to accomplish the goals we lay out and set before us, the motivation that just drives us to achieve, and then the motivation we have to grow and impact our emotional intelligence, namely our impact on others. Mm-hmm. So, and Matt, you were looking at, I know some definitions of the motivation, and I think you we're going to share the definition that Daniel Goleman has used. Daniel Goleman, the father of emotional intelligence, who coined the term and developed the science behind emotional intelligence, and his definition of motivation.
Yep. And real quick, before we do that, I just wanted to talk about a phrase that I guess put it in a nutshell. Emotional intelligence, and just really blew me away when I was taking a look at everything. People intentionally use their thinking and behavior to guide emotions rather than letting their emotions guide behavior.
I like that.
How the heck is that possible? Yeah. I mean, I looked at that and I was like, holy smokes, it's powerful. But I think that's the path that we're trying to go down, of at least being more aware and growing our emotional intelligence, as we talked about self-awareness, self-regulation, now motivation. That's the end goal. It seems lofty to me,
right.
But I thought that was a really interesting way to think about emotional intelligence as we opened up. But
I think it's a very powerful phrase. And can you share it again with us?
Yep. Emotionally intelligent people intentionally use their thinking and behavior to guide emotions rather than letting their emotions guide their behavior.
Yeah. So I'm reminded of John OLeary when I hear that. And John OLeary, who's as a friend, wrote a book called On Fire. And in the book On Fire, John talks about his journey. He suffered burns as a young man, burns on 100% of his body. And his story is incredible. And if you've never read the book On Fire, I encourage you to go order it. But what John OLeary likes to say is we have a choice every day to wake up and become a victim or a victor. Mm-hmm. And as John says, the victim wakes up every day and asks themselves three questions. And that's, I think, the second half of your phrase, Matt, right? Mm-hmm. The person that's guided by their emotions can ask themselves three questions. Those three questions are, why me? Like, why me that I'm stuck at home and I can't go into the office and be with my colleagues? Or why me that, I'm in a relationship that's not rewarding to me? Or whatever it might be, why me? Just that depressed why me. The second question that victims like to ask themselves is, who cares? Who cares about my plight? Who cares about what I'm going through? Who cares about what my day is going to look like? The third question that victims ask themselves every morning is, what more can I do? I'm trying hard. What more can I do? And it's that defeatist attitude. It's the defeatist attitude that comes from, as Matt said, being guided by your emotions and letting your emotions dominate your mental state. The victor, on the other hand, wakes up and asks themselves three very different questions. The questions the victor asks themselves are, why me? Like, why me that I get to wake up in the greatest country in the history of man? Or why me that I get to wake up and go to the spigot and turn on the faucet and clean water comes out, which is an absolute miracle for much of the world? Why me that I get to go to work and solve problems for people and have the ability to go and earn unlimited income? Why me? The second question the victor asks themselves, who cares? Who cares about what I'm about to go do today? Whose life am I impacting? Who cares about me? Who's invested in me? Who is my actions important to? Why me? Who cares, right? Why me? Who cares? The third question the victor asked themselves, what more can I do to make tomorrow better than today? That's a very different question than what more can I do? What more can I do to make tomorrow better than today? And I think when you wake up with those three questions, when you wake up with that mindset, you're going to impact your emotions in a much more powerful way than your emotions impact you or your day.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like that's the recipe to live that out.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, before we got distracted, back to Daniel Goleman's motivation. First aspect of it, our personal drive to improve. Second aspect, our commitment to the goals we set for ourselves. Our readiness to act on opportunities that arise. And 4 is resilience. So those 4 components make up Daniel Goleman's theory of motivation.
Yeah, and I think the one that resonates or speaks to me most is the resilience,
Mm-hmm.
right? Resilience is that trait that we often say you either have it or you don't, but I don't believe that. I believe you can develop it. It's a matter of want. Now, again, ironically, resilience being a component of motivation, I think motivation drives our resilience. For
Mm-hmm.
those who aren't motivated, it's very difficult for them to be resilient, to keep showing up to the fight.
Mm-hmm.
But, you think about resilience, it's very closely related to grit. And grit is something that I think we develop over life because of, many cases it's inborn in us or it's part of our drive, but it also can be because of situations and it be very situational. Some of the most successful people I know didn't come from great wealth or didn't come from, being born on second base and thinking they hit a double. These are people that really have fought through their lives and been able to overcome hardships through hard work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Resilience for me comes back to the concept we talked a lot about, I guess, a month or two ago, the why. You talked about continuing to get back up, get into the ring again. If you don't have that why and it's not the core of what you do, and especially from a goal setting perspective, if it's just I want to wake up and do this, or a more long-term goal is maybe something extrinsic or external, I feel like you have to have a very strong why and stay refocused on the why, and that's something that really helps that resilience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you talk about that grit, that resilience, and what's it come from, how's it formed, how's it shaped, how's it developed and nurtured over the years, it's pretty difficult to develop it at 50, right? Like if you've just spent a life waiting for something good to happen, waiting for someone else to do something, and you lack that responsibility, I think, for the outcomes of your life, you're probably not very resilient. On the other hand, if you just take total ownership, another one of my favorite books, by the way, by Leif Babin and Jocko Willink, but if you take total ownership for the outcomes of your life and you say, whatever it is, it's my responsibility, whatever failures I encounter, whatever setbacks I experience, it's because I didn't do something, right? And on the other hand, it's not always having the right answer. I think those that have the greatest resilience and those who have the greatest grit, it's not that they know exactly what to do. They just know I have to do something.
Mm-hmm. I'm
going to move forward, right? I'm not going to sit here and wallow in fear, wallow in self-pity. We go back to those questions, the John OLeary questions of why me, who cares, and what more can I do? It's amazing how those questions, when the victim asks them of themselves, it turns them inward. And when we look inward is when we start to isolate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Isolation leads to desolation. Desolation leads to desperation. Why do you think we're dealing with so much depression right now? We were built for community, right? As human beings, we were built for community. And here we are over the past year where we've been put into isolation. That isolation has led many people to desolation and desperation. And then, that's where you end up, is in that depressed mode. So be mindful of the grit that just says, hey, I don't know what's going to happen today, but I'm going to wake up and fight.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people that usually become the most successful.
And I think tied to that, as I read the third one again, our readiness to act on opportunities that arise. The striking word here for me are opportunities. not the challenges.
That's right.
But the opportunities. And I think it's another word that comes to mind. We talked about resilience, but also being optimistic. I think the optimism to try to tackle those problems, to go in with sort of that can-do attitude. And optimism is always thrown around, and people say, "Oh, you're an optimist," or "You're a pessimist." But me, I found a fun little study, but it was decades long by Boston University, Harvard University, decades, and they found that people that are optimistic, the more optimistic, live 15% longer lives.
Wow.
15% optimistic. So
that's amazing.
They measured it. They measured it over decades, and I don't want to say the wrong terms. In studies, correlation, causation, all of that. But all I know is that the more optimistic people that they measured through self assessments, things like that, over decades, lived 15% longer than the people that ranked lowest on optimism.
Wow. And when you put that in perspective, I think the average life expectancy is 78 years now or something. Call it 80 years.
That'll be my next study.
Okay, 80 years. If it's 80 years, that means that the optimist lives 12 years longer, roughly, right?
Anyone have a calculator?
That's amazing. Well, 10% of 80 is to 8, and another 5 on top of that gives you 4. So 12 years longer. So
think about that.
Yeah. Well, I think you're safe because you're not an optimist, so you won't see 92.
No, that among other things, right?
Yeah, but think about it. That's amazing. I mean, and I don't know if you all want to live to be 92. I question that some days, but that is an incredible correlation, or I think explanation or proof of the first statement you had today. That was essentially, we can impact our emotions, or we can live subject to our emotions impacting us. Mm-hmm. And when we decide that we want to impact our emotions, as Matt and I were talking this morning at the coffee pot, we said, hey, how much easier is it to have a good day when you say, I'm going to have a good day, versus when you wake up and say, this day is going to be horrible? What do you think is going to happen?
I think you had a very technical term. You said the Eeyore effect.
The Eeyore effect. Yeah, Eeyore. Yeah, I mean, for all of our friends who love Pooh, I mean, Winnie the Pooh had great days because all my man wanted was some honey. Right, and he was an easy character to satisfy because he was happy, he was enthusiastic to meet people, and honey made him just like literally shake with joy, because it's the simple pleasures, and he knew what he wanted in life, and he was able to go out and usually found it. Where Eeyore, when you contrast Winnie the Pooh with Eeyore, I mean, Eeyore woke up every day saying, what's going to go wrong? And guess what? Something usually went wrong for him. Even when something went right, in his mind, he interpreted it as going wrong. Mm-hmm. How much do we do that to him? How much sabotage do we put into our lives by being Eeyore? How often do we walk around and say, something's going to go wrong, right? Something bad's going to happen to me. I'm just waiting for it. We all know someone like that. Mm-hmm. How much fun are they to be around? If you have a choice and you get to hang out with Eeyore, or you want to hang out with Winnie the Pooh, who are you choosing?
Winnie the Pooh all day.
Yeah.
So that leads me to the question, can we become more optimistic?
If you desire to, I think, right? Mm-hmm. So my approach to that is, I think that we can be if we decide we're going to be. Mm-hmm. But if you're waiting for something to happen to give you optimism, probably isn't going to happen.
And I think, too, it's how you process. We talked, I think, last show about the concept of reframing, mentally reframing a situation, and how you view a situation through what lens. And I think you can have an optimistic or a pessimistic lens, depending on your disposition. But, before you take a situation negative, as hard as it is, with emotions flying around, and we talked about emotions and behaviors, think about it. Can it be something else than malicious intent? Could there have been another reason why someone acted that way, or something happened? What's a positive spin? What's a positive potential that can happen? And when you start to reframe and are open to it and are optimistic about it, it's amazing how there's a lot of other explanations for what happens in life than just bad, negative, poor me, going back to your 3 questions and how you can view them.
Yeah. And I think part of that is how we face failure, right? So what you're talking about is those setbacks we have in life. And if we don't learn from them and we just want to like dwell on the negative of them, then they're not learning moments. But for people who achieve great things, people that have high emotional intelligence, people that have high levels of optimism, what do? They take failures, they process them, and they learn from them. Mm-hmm. And those that don't have a high level of emotional intelligence, those that don't have a high level of drive and motivation, they see those failures and they then want to avoid them in the future. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's one of the key differences between having a high level of emotional intelligence and a low level of emotional intelligence, between having a growth mindset and a fixed mindset, is how do we process failures? And I always say, one of our jobs as a parent is to help our children fail without becoming failures. And how do we let our children experience failure, right? Go out and make mistakes and learn from them without allowing them to become failures. So in other words, how do you let them have some of those failures that aren't critical, that aren't mission critical failures, the ones that don't get them put in jail or, whatever, which for some of us is tougher than others. But, and Lucy's only not quite 2, so, right? Lucy's 1.5, I think, or a little over a year. So she's still having small failures, like tripping and falling and maybe bumping her head on something, which is actually kind of important to let her experience because that's how she learns balance. That's how she learns to grow. That's how she learns to develop those motor skills. Now, as they get older, that's a little more difficult. As professionals, as sales professionals, how do we learn from our mistakes? So how do we fail without becoming failures? How do we learn from the mistakes either inside of accounts or inside of the things we're trying to do? And then resurrect those accounts, bring them back and allow us to win there or allow us to still hit our number in our pipeline. How do we learn from the mistakes to become more masterful in what we do? Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that great people do is they learn from those mistakes and journal what's happening. One of the things I like to do with some of the leaders I work with is I ask them to create their own leadership journal. So document the experiences you're having, the situations you find yourself in, what happened, what were the situations, what was the scenario, what were the decisions that were made, and what was your thought and what was the outcome. So that when you actually become either a general manager, CEO, or whatever it might be, you have your own leadership journal that you don't always have to look outside for.
And I know we're coming up on the end here, but we often talk about journaling, and that's probably so foreign to some people. So I just wanted to spend a minute there because in all the research and all the review for EQ, and especially as we break down these components, there's 4 things that continuously come up from all the studies, all the experts. Number 1, and we've talked about all these, but I really think it's important to emphasize it, knowing your values and being rooted to your values. Mm-hmm. I think people think that's just understood and forget that exercise, but sit down and know your values, review your values, because that will help you process information and decisions.
And I would just add, daily's not too often with that.
Yeah, great point.
Right? Daily is not too often to actually just think about your why, think about your values, think about what drives you and what you want to be, and make sure you're being committed to that on a daily basis.
And if you're not doing it daily, you're probably doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. Number 2 is accountability partner. That's probably foreign to others as well, or that's that, I don't know if I want to really be accountable. I love waking up and watching at 8, and I'll take some notes, but it will stop there.
It'll sink in eventually.
Yeah, so the accountability partner. Have you gone out and gotten an accountability partner? Again, someone that can give you that candid feedback to journey with. The third one, which reminded me of this, was journaling. Mm-hmm. And in a second, let's talk about that. But all of the psychologists, all the research, journaling is so key. Journaling is important. It can, there's not a right or wrong way to do it. I think it's just getting the pen moving on the pad. And I'll let you talk about that. Number 4 is having written goals, obviously, but the time to review those, as we just discussed, and we're talking about, how do you react from a failure? Well, you have to sit down, review it. What'd you learn? So that with all that being said, just quickly before we wrap up here, just talk about journaling, or someone that's like, what do I do? I don't know. That seems a bit weird. Do I have to go to a shrink afterwards, or what led you to journaling, and what do you do?
Well, with me, journaling was an interesting journey, no pun intended. But I actually took years to start journaling effectively because I thought about, all the things that could get in the way. I thought, well, what's the right journal? Do I want a lined pad? Do I want to use like graph paper? So literally it took me like years of buying journals and being like, oh, I don't want to start it because I don't know if it's going to be right. So I sat around with journals that were blank and would think about, how am I going to write in them? Just get any notebook. Get something that's bound, a bound notebook, and start journaling your thoughts. It could be lists. There's no pattern. The pages don't have to be uniform, right? There could be page 1 might have a list of goals. Page 2 might have thoughts that get in the way from me getting to my goals. Page 3 might have a grocery list. Page 4 might be just thoughts of the day. Page 5 might be whatever. One of the things I thought of when my kids were younger is I wanted to start a journal for each of them with letters to them, that I would just write letters about things they did that day, what happened on that. And I never got to it. And here I am with kids that are very old, and I miss that memory. So, start your journal today of letters to Lucy and just randomly write in, here's something that happened today. Here's something how I felt. I looked at you walk for the first time, and this is what it stirred in me. Journaling just gets those emotions, those thoughts, those desires, those goals, all that stuff that gets heavy when we carry it inside of us, gets it on paper, and it frees us from carrying it anymore. And it opens our eyes to it. So journaling, there's not a right way, there's not a wrong way. Get a notebook, get a pen, and start writing.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, we appreciate you guys being with us as always. Hopefully this was valuable to you in some way. Think about your grit. Think about the way your attitude, the way your view of the world, the way your self-talk drives your emotions, or do your emotions drive your self-talk? And what do you need to do? How do you start the process of maybe flipping that script and taking control of it? Think about today. Why me? Why am I so blessed? Why am I so lucky? Who cares? Who are all those people that are important to you and that you're important to? And then what more can you do to make tomorrow better than today? It probably has something to do with someone else. What more can you do usually is, what can I do for others? What can I do for my community? What can I do for those I love? And I think you start to flip the script on life. You start to become a little more motivated. You start to become a little more in control of your emotions, and then that'll make you more in control of your outcomes and your experiences. So thank you all for being with us. It's been fun. We look forward to seeing you next week. And between now and then, take care and God bless. Thank you.